Trust, Temptation and Betrayal. The love story of a millionaire and a doctor. A story of love, temptation and heartbreak, with a shocking twist. What if the love of your life made the ultimate mistake? What if trust was shattered beyond repair? And what if one decision could change everything forever? This is not just a love story. It's a journey of passion, betrayal and redemption that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Are you ready for the emotional roller coaster? Welcome, new and returning viewers. If you're here for the first time, welcome to a world of unforgettable stories. If you've been watching but haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more gripping tales. Don't just watch, be part of the story. Like if you love intense romance, comment your thoughts. We love hearing from you. Share this story with someone who needs to see it. Let's dive in, but be warned, this story will stay with you long after it ends. The night was dark, the city wrapped in a thick shroud of rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance, sending faint tremors through the windows of St. Mary's Hospital. Inside the brightly lit emergency room, chaos reigned. Nurses rushed from one patient to another, machines beeped incessantly, and the sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. Dr. Aisha Malik moved swiftly down the hallway, her brown hands steady as she flipped through a patient's chart. Her jet-black hair was tied into a neat bun, her deep brown eyes filled with quiet determination. She was a woman of grace and brilliance, one of the best surgeons the hospital had ever seen. She had spent the past 10 years building her career, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and every ounce of personal life to achieve her dream. Tonight was no different. Just as she handed off the chart to a nurse, the ER doors burst open with a loud bang. Paramedics rushed in, their uniforms soaked from the rain, pushing a stretcher with a man slumped over, blood trickling down his temple. Male, mid-30s, suspected concussion from a car accident. Blood pressure stable but slightly elevated. Minor lacerations, one of the paramedics shouted. Aisha's trained eyes scanned the patient. Broad shoulders, expensive suit torn at the sleeve, a streak of crimson against his pale forehead. Then she saw his face. Her breath caught in her throat. Ethan Carter. Even battered and bruised, his presence filled the room. His sharp jawline, slightly obscured by a shadow of stubble, his tousled brown hair damp from the rain, and his piercing blue eyes, half open, but filled with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. The Ethan Carter, billionaire, business tycoon, a name that had dominated headlines for years. She knew of him, of course. Everyone did. He was ruthless in business, charming in public, and dangerously attractive in ways that made women forget their good sense. And now he was here, bleeding, vulnerable, looking directly at her. Aisha shook off the momentary surprise and stepped forward, her professional instincts kicking in. "Mr. Carter, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice calm yet firm. His eyelids fluttered, a slow smirk playing on his lips despite the pain. "An angel?" His voice was hoarse, weak, but still held an undeniable charm. "Have I died?" Aisha bit back a sigh. The flirtatious types were always the hardest to deal with. "No, Mr. Carter, you're very much alive, but you have a mild concussion and some superficial wounds." His lips quirked upward. "Lucky me. I get to wake up to you." She ignored the flutter in her chest and motioned for a nurse to bring over a tray of medical supplies. "Let's keep the flirting to a minimum while I check for any serious injuries." Ethan winced slightly as she pressed gently against the cut on his forehead, but his gaze never wavered from hers. "You're good at this," he murmured. "It's my job," she replied curtly, dabbing at the wound. "No, I mean, you care." His voice softened. "I can see it in your eyes." For the briefest moment, Aisha's hands faltered. She had been praised for her skill, her precision, her intelligence, but rarely had anyone noticed her heart. She masked her emotions quickly. Saving lives is what I was meant to do. Ethan studied her, as if trying to decipher something deeper beneath her words. And I think I was meant to meet you. Aisha's pulse quickened. Just for a second. It was ridiculous. She had treated hundreds of patients before, many of them rich, powerful men. But Ethan Carter was different. She could feel it in the way his gaze lingered, in the way his presence filled the space between them. Dismissing the thought, she focused on cleaning the wound, pressing a fresh bandage against his temple. "Hold still," she ordered, her voice steadier now. "Are you always this commanding?" "Only when people don't listen," Ethan chuckled but winced immediately. "Noted, no more jokes." Aisha allowed herself a small smile. That would be ideal. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain outside, the distant hum of hospital monitors, and the crackling energy between them. Then Ethan spoke again, this time with more sincerity. "You saved my life tonight." Aisha glanced at him. "You would have been fine without me." "No," Ethan said quietly. "I wouldn't have." His words held a weight she didn't understand yet. A deeper truth hidden beneath them. Something told her this night was only the beginning. She had no idea just how much her life was about to change. The rain had long since stopped, but its remnants lingered in the air, fresh, crisp, and carrying the scent of something new. Aisha Malik sat in the hospital's quiet lounge, sipping a cup of warm tea as she stared out at the city lights. It had been 3 days since Ethan Carter had been rushed into her ER. 3 days since she had last seen those piercing blue eyes staring into hers. And yet, for reasons she couldn't explain, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him. So when a nurse approached her with a puzzled look, holding out a bouquet of the most exquisite red roses she had ever seen, Aisha's breath caught in her throat. "Doctor Malik, these were just delivered for you," the nurse said, grinning. Aisha blinked. "For me?" The nurse nodded. "And there's a note." Aisha hesitated before taking the small ivory card nestled between the roses. "I forgot to thank you for saving my life. Dinner. Ethan Carter." A flush crept up her neck. This man was relentless. For the next few days, Aisha received something new every morning. One day, it was a box of the finest chocolates from Belgium. The next, a handwritten letter, detailing how much he admired her dedication to her work. Then, front-row tickets to a charity gala, one where Ethan himself would be the guest of honor. And yet, she rejected every offer. It wasn't that she wasn't tempted. Ethan Carter was irresistible, powerful, charming, and so incredibly confident in his pursuit of her. But Aisha was a woman who had built walls around her heart. She had seen what happened when love clouded judgment, had witnessed women give up everything for a man, only to be left shattered. She couldn't afford to be one of them. So when Ethan showed up at the hospital one evening, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit, she was more than a little annoyed. "Mr. Carter," she sighed, crossing her arms, "you do realize that stalking is frowned upon?" Ethan smirked. "Is it stalking if I'm just making sure my doctor is taking care of herself?" "You don't need to check on me," she said flatly. "I'm fine." "Are you?" He tilted his head, stepping closer. "Because from what I've heard, you work ridiculous hours, barely sleep, and have no social life." Aisha stiffened. "Who told you that?" Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping to a soft murmur. "I did my research, Dr. Malik, and I think someone as incredible as you deserves a break." Aisha swallowed hard. The way he looked at her, like she was the most fascinating thing in the world, made her stomach flutter, but she wasn't going to make it easy for him. "Flattery won't work on me, Mr. Carter." Ethan grinned. "I don't need flattery. I just need one dinner." Aisha stared at him, torn between caution and curiosity. For the first time in years, her heart won over her mind. "Fine," she said, exhaling. One dinner. Ethan's eyes lit up. I'll pick you up at 7. Aisha expected their dinner to be at some pretentious 5-star restaurant where Ethan would flaunt his wealth, but instead he took her to a small, intimate rooftop garden, illuminated by hundreds of twinkling fairy lights. A private chef prepared a meal just for them, and soft jazz played in the background. It was perfect. As they dined beneath the stars, Aisha found herself lowering her defenses. Ethan wasn't just a billionaire with a pretty face. He was surprisingly thoughtful, funny, and genuinely interested in her. You know, he said, swirling his wine, I never expected to meet someone like you that night. Aisha arched a brow. A doctor? A woman who could make me question everything. She stilled. What do you mean? Ethan leaned forward, his gaze intense. I've spent my life chasing success, deals, money, power. But when I met you, for the first time, I wanted something real. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. She had spent years keeping men at a distance, fearing heartbreak. But as she looked at Ethan Carter, so devastatingly sincere, she felt her walls begin to crack. And just like that, love began to bloom. Aisha had always believed in logic, in science, in facts. Love was something she had never prioritized, until Ethan Carter entered her life like a storm, washing away every doubt, every hesitation, and every fear. Their romance had been an unexpected whirlwind, months of late-night conversations, stolen kisses, and grand yet intimate gestures. Ethan was persistent, unwavering in his devotion, proving to her time and again that what they had was real. And now, against all odds, against every societal expectation, he had asked her to be his wife. Aisha stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, her heart pounding. She wore a simple yet stunning white lace dress that hugged her slender frame, her long dark hair cascading in soft waves. The golden bangles on her wrists jingled softly as she pressed her hands together, nerves and excitement mingling within her. This wasn't the lavish, high-profile wedding people expected from Ethan Carter, the billionaire, the mogul, the man who could have had any woman in the world. Instead, it was intimate, secret, sacred, just for them. The wedding took place in a secluded villa by the lake, hidden from the media and the world. The air was filled with the scent of roses and jasmine, and the soft glow of candlelight flickered around them. The only witnesses were a priest, a few close friends, and the vast, endless sky. As Aisha stepped toward Ethan, she felt time slow down. Ethan stood at the altar, dressed in an ivory suit, his gaze locked onto her as if she was the only thing that had ever mattered. His usual confidence was still there, but tonight there was something else in his eyes. Raw emotion, a love so deep it threatened to consume her. When she finally reached him, he took her hands in his grip warm and reassuring. "You look breathtaking," he whispered. Aisha smiled, her heart hammering. "And you look nervous." Ethan let out a soft chuckle. "I've closed billion-dollar deals, faced ruthless competitors, but nothing has ever mattered to me as much as this moment." Aisha swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. The priest began the ceremony, and as they exchanged vows, tears welled in Aisha's eyes. "I promise to love you, cherish you, and stand beside you through every storm." Ethan's voice was steady, filled with unshakable devotion. Aisha's hands trembled as she spoke her vows. "I promise to trust you, to believe in us, and to love you with everything I have." As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan didn't wait. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, soft, deep, and filled with a love that left no room for doubt. Aisha melted into him, knowing in this moment she had made the right choice. He worshipped her. From the moment they returned from their honeymoon, a dreamy escape to the Maldives, where they spent their days wrapped in passion and laughter. Ethan made it his mission to give Aisha the world. Every morning, she woke up to handwritten notes on her pillow, simple words of love that made her heart race. "You are the best decision I ever made. You make life beautiful. I'll love you in this lifetime and every lifetime after." And then there were the grand gestures. One evening, Ethan surprised her with a private dinner on a yacht, the skyline twinkling behind them. As they sipped champagne, he slipped a diamond bracelet onto her wrist. Aisha gasped. "Ethan, this is too much." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Nothing will ever be too much for you." She had spent her life working hard, never indulging in extravagance, always putting others before herself. But Ethan showered her with love in ways she had never imagined. Yet, despite the luxury, the true gift was the way he looked at her, like she was his entire world. They built a home together, a sprawling mansion overlooking the hills, filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and lazy Sunday mornings in bed. Ethan became her biggest supporter, celebrating every milestone in her medical career, standing by her side when she doubted herself. And in return, Aisha became his sanctuary. The one person who saw beyond the billionaire, beyond the business mogul, and loved him for the man he truly was. Their love was effortless, consuming, powerful. Aisha had never felt safer. She had never trusted anyone more. And so, when Ethan whispered, "forever," against her lips one night, she believed him. She had no idea that forever wasn't promised, that the man who had given her everything would one day shatter her heart. That betrayal was just waiting on the horizon. The world admired them. Aisha Malik, a brilliant, compassionate doctor, saving lives with her skilled hands and golden heart. Ethan Carter, a self-made millionaire, a business tycoon whose name commanded power and influence. Together, they were unstoppable. Every magazine featured them as the ultimate power couple. The Doctor and the Tycoon, a love story written in the stars. Ethan Carter's greatest investment? His wife. To the world, they had it all: success, love, wealth, and unshakable devotion. And for a long time, Aisha believed it too. Despite their demanding careers, Ethan and Aisha made time for each other. On days when her shifts at the hospital drained her, Ethan would be waiting at home with her favorite warm tea, pulling her into his arms the moment she walked through the door. "Tough day?" he'd ask, his voice low, soothing. "It's better now." She'd sigh against his chest, inhaling his familiar scent. Some nights, he'd whisk her away on surprise weekend getaways: Paris, Santorini, Tokyo. "You deserve the world, Aisha," he'd whisper as they danced under city lights, his hands wrapped protectively around her waist. And when Ethan was the one drowning in work, she was his rock. Aisha would force him to take breaks, sitting beside him in his office, massaging his temples while he ranted about business deals. "You're brilliant, Ethan. You'll figure this out." He always did, because they were strong. They were in love. They were invincible. Or so she thought. At first, it was subtle. Ethan's business expanded rapidly, his empire growing across continents. With that expansion came longer hours, more late-night meetings, and endless business trips. Aisha missed him, but she understood. She was busy too, building hospitals, mentoring young doctors, and pushing the boundaries of medical innovation. Some nights their schedules clashed. She'd come home exhausted, longing for his embrace, only to find an empty bed. "Emergency board meeting. Last-minute flight to London. I'll make it up to you, I promise." And he always did, with extravagant gifts, with lavish dinners, with apologies that melted away her doubts, until the doubts started growing faster than the apologies. Aisha wasn't blind. She noticed the changes. The way Ethan's phone was always buzzing late at night. The way he sometimes seemed distracted, even when he was with her. The way his kisses felt rushed, his mind elsewhere. And yet she convinced herself it was just work, because Ethan loved her, didn't he? One evening, as Aisha sat in their luxurious living room, scrolling through news headlines, she saw a picture that made her stomach twist. A charity gala, a high-profile business event. Ethan Carter standing tall, exuding power and confidence, and beside him, Victoria Monroe, stunning, blonde, effortlessly elegant. Aisha's fingers trembled as she read the caption. Billionaire Ethan Carter spotted with rising business star Victoria Monroe. Powerhouse duo in the making. Her heart pounded. She could still hear Ethan's words from 2 nights ago. I'll be working late. Just business meetings. But if it was just business, why hadn't he told her about the gala? Why hadn't he mentioned Victoria? Aisha shook her head. She was being irrational, paranoid. Ethan was hers. They had built a life together, a perfect life, hadn't they? That night, Ethan came home late. Aisha was still awake, waiting. When he stepped inside, loosening his tie, she forced a smile. Long day? She asked, her voice soft. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Exhausting. Meetings back to back. Aisha hesitated. Then, carefully, she said, I saw some pictures from the gala. Looked like a big event. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Oh yeah, last-minute thing. Didn't think it was important. Aisha nodded slowly. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him, so she let it go. She didn't ask why he hadn't told her. She didn't ask about Victoria Monroe. She trusted him because their love was perfect, because their life was perfect, wasn't it? As Aisha drifted off to sleep in Ethan's arms that night, she convinced herself that she was overthinking, that their love was still as strong as ever, that Ethan would never betray her. But in the depths of her heart, a quiet whisper told her the truth. Perfection is always an illusion, and illusions never last forever. Aisha sat by the window, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. The penthouse felt too big, too empty. The dinner she had prepared hours ago sat cold on the dining table, untouched. Ethan had promised he would be home. Just one more meeting, love. I'll be there soon. But soon had turned into hours. And now, as the clock struck midnight, she sighed, picking up her phone to check for messages. Nothing. For the first time since they got married, a hollow ache settled in her chest. Ethan's business trips became more frequent. London, Dubai, Paris. At first, Aisha understood. He was a businessman, after all. His empire demanded sacrifices. But then the late-night calls started. Aisha would wake up at 3 a.m. to the soft hum of Ethan's voice in the living room, deep in hushed conversation. Whenever she asked about it, his answer was always the same. Just work, darling. Go back to sleep. And she did. Because she trusted him. Didn't she? One day, as Aisha stood in the walk-in closet, she noticed something strange. Ethan's favorite cologne, Tom Ford Noir, the one he never left the house without, was still sitting on the shelf. Yet he had been away on a trip for 3 days. A knot formed in her stomach. She pushed the thought away, convincing herself there was an explanation. But the small things kept piling up. Missed calls that went unanswered. Texts that took hours to get a reply. The way his touch felt rushed, his mind always somewhere else. And yet, whenever she questioned him, Ethan smiled, kissed her forehead, and whispered sweet reassurances. You worry too much, love. Everything is fine. Aisha wanted to believe him. So she did, because she loved him, because their marriage was built on trust. Wasn't it? One evening, Aisha decided to surprise Ethan. She knew he was in a meeting at a high-end hotel downtown, so she made a reservation for dinner in the same hotel restaurant, thinking it would be a sweet, romantic gesture. As she waited in the lobby, she heard two business executives talking nearby. Carter and Monroe are a force to be reckoned with. They make a stunning team. Her heart skipped a beat. Monroe. Victoria. Monroe. She had seen the headlines. She had heard the name whispered at business events. But she had never given it much thought. Until now. Aisha swallowed the unease creeping into her mind. It was just business, right? Shaking her head, she walked to the restaurant, determined to wait for Ethan. But he never showed up. And when she called him, "I'm sorry, love. The meeting ran longer than expected. I'll see you at home." Aisha didn't tell him she had been there. She simply hung up and stared at her untouched dinner. A part of her heart cracked that night. As days passed, the doubts lingered. But every time they surfaced, Ethan found a way to erase them. A surprise weekend getaway in the countryside, a diamond necklace left on her pillow, a passionate night where he held her like he would never let go. And for a while, Aisha let herself believe that she was just overthinking, believe that Ethan was still the man who loved her beyond reason. But deep inside, the shadows of doubt refused to leave. They whispered at night. They lingered in the empty side of the bed when he was gone. And worst of all, they told her that the life she thought was perfect was beginning to fall apart. One evening, as Aisha sat in the quiet of their penthouse, she felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of losing Ethan, but fear that she was already losing him, and she had no idea how to stop it. The whispers of doubt had turned into echoes of truth waiting to be uncovered. Aisha had spent her life trusting in love, in loyalty, in the vows they had made. But what if trust was not enough? What if love was not enough? What if she was right to be afraid? Her name was everywhere. Victoria Monroe, the rising star of the business world, a woman who knew how to command a room with just a glance. Glamorous, sophisticated, ruthlessly ambitious. She had climbed the corporate ladder with an elegance that left men awed and women intimidated. And now she had entered Ethan Carter's world, not just as a business associate, but as a force that would change everything. Aisha first heard Victoria's name at a charity gala. She wasn't there, but Ethan was, and so was Victoria. Ethan Carter and Victoria Monroe, a power duo shaking up the business world. Aisha stared at the photos online. Ethan stood tall in his signature black suit, his smile sharp, confident, and beside him, Victoria Monroe, a vision of perfection. Blonde curls cascading over her shoulders, red lips curving in amusement, a designer gown that hugged her flawless figure. Aisha felt something tighten in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar feeling she had never associated with Ethan before. Jealousy. But why? Ethan had business partners before. This was just another deal, wasn't it? It didn't take long before Victoria's name became a constant presence in their lives. Ethan talked about her often, almost too often. Victoria is brilliant. She sees angles I hadn't even considered. We're working late on this deal. She's a genius when it comes to negotiations. Victoria thinks we should expand into European markets. It's a bold move. Aisha smiled, nodded, pretended it didn't bother her, but it did, because Ethan had never spoken about another woman this way before. not even about her. The first time Aisha met Victoria in person, it wasn't planned. It was late one evening, and Aisha had decided to surprise Ethan at his office. She brought him dinner, his favorite pasta from the little Italian place they loved, but when she arrived, the atmosphere felt different. Ethan's office door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Aisha saw her. Victoria Monroe, perched on Ethan's desk, laughing, leaning just a little too close. Ethan was smiling. The kind of smile that once belonged only to Aisha. A chill ran through her. She knocked. The moment Ethan saw her, his smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but Aisha saw it. Victoria turned, her icy blue eyes sweeping over Aisha with a polite, almost dismissive smile. "Dr. Malik, what a pleasure." She said it smoothly, as if she hadn't just been flirting with Aisha's husband. Aisha forced a smile. "Likewise, I thought I'd bring Ethan some dinner. He forgets to eat when he's working late." Ethan cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Thank you, love. That's really sweet." But Aisha saw the way Victoria's lips curled slightly, the way she crossed her legs, too comfortable in his space, the way she held just a little too much power in that room. For the first time, Aisha felt like an outsider in her own husband's world. After that night, Aisha began to notice things she had ignored before. Ethan was texting more, but when she asked who, he would just say, "Work." He was coming home, later and later, and sometimes when he held her at night, it felt like he was somewhere else. Aisha tried to push away the doubts, tried to believe that it was just business, that Victoria Monroe was just another colleague. But deep inside, something had shifted. A seed of fear had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. One evening, Aisha attended a high-profile medical conference. As she sipped her wine, a woman from the social elite leaned in with a smirk. "Your husband has been spending a lot of time with Victoria Monroe, hasn't he?" Aisha's fingers tightened around her glass. She forced a smile. "It's just business." The woman raised an eyebrow. "If you say so, dear." And just like that, a simple conversation turned into a silent warning. Aisha wanted to dismiss it, but the whispers followed her home. In the way Ethan avoided her gaze when she asked about his meetings, in the way Victoria's name never left his conversations, in the way love was starting to feel like a memory instead of a promise. She wasn't a fool. She wasn't naive. But she trusted Ethan, didn't she? She wanted to fight for their marriage, to believe in the man who had once moved heaven and earth for her. But how do you fight for something when the person you love is already slipping away? Aisha lay awake in bed that night, listening to Ethan's steady breathing beside her. He was here, with her. But somehow he felt miles away. And across the city, in a luxurious penthouse of her own, Victoria Monroe sipped her wine and smiled, because she knew. The game had begun, and Aisha had no idea how dangerous it would become. Temptation is never sudden. It creeps in like a whisper, software subtle, deadly, and before you realize it, you've already crossed the line. Ethan Carter had always been a man of control, discipline, loyalty, but Victoria Monroe was unlike any woman he had ever met. She knew how to push just enough, how to play the game with effortless grace, and worst of all, she knew his weakness. Ego. She fed it, stroked it, made him feel like a god, and that was how it began. At first, it was harmless, or so Ethan told himself. Late-night meetings that stretched into midnight conversations. Inside jokes no one else understood. A touch on the arm that lingered a second too long. Victoria made herself irreplaceable. "You're brilliant, Ethan. No one in this industry has your vision. They don't appreciate you the way they should. A man like you deserves more." She didn't rush, She didn't push, she simply waited, because she knew. She could see the cracks forming. And soon, Ethan would fall. Aisha noticed the shift. At first it was small things. Ethan's text messages became more frequent. His phone calls lasted longer. And when she asked, he brushed it off with a casual, "Just work, love." But something felt off. Something she couldn't explain. A distance. Like he was there, but not really. Nights that used to be filled with warmth, laughter, and whispered secrets were now filled with silence, and it was killing her. Victoria was patient. She knew Ethan still loved Aisha. She knew breaking him wouldn't be easy, but she didn't need to break him. She just needed to make him doubt. One night, after a long business dinner, she found the perfect moment. They were alone in Ethan's office. The lights were dim. The city skyline glowed behind them. She poured them both a drink, leaned in just close enough for him to feel her presence. "You work too hard, Ethan. You give too much of yourself." He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair. "It's what I do." She tilted her head, smiled. "You know, sometimes I wonder, do you ever just want to let go?" Her voice was soft, almost hypnotic. Ethan swallowed. "I have Aisha." "I know." She took a sip of wine. "She's a lucky woman." She paused, let the words hang between them, then she leaned in just a little closer. "But sometimes love isn't enough, is it?" Ethan's breath hitched, because for the first time, he didn't know the answer. Aisha tried to silence the doubts. She told herself it was just stress, that Ethan was busy, that she was overthinking. But doubt is a poison, and once it enters your heart, it spreads. She noticed how he avoided looking into her eyes for too long, how he stopped reaching for her hand when they walked together, how the scent of his cologne was no longer just his. One night, she stood in front of the mirror, studied herself, her warm brown skin, her deep, soulful eyes, her curves wrapped in a silk nightgown. She was beautiful, strong, but was she still enough for him? Her heart clenched at the thought, because for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't sure. Ethan knew he was walking a dangerous line. He knew he should stop, turn back, go home. But temptation is cruel. It doesn't demand. It invites. One evening, after another late-night deal, Victoria sat beside him in the back of his limousine. The air between them was thick, electric. She didn't say a word, just reached out and touched his hand. Software deliberate. Ethan should have pulled away, but he didn't, because in that moment he didn't want to. And just like that, the line was blurred. Aisha woke up to an empty bed. Ethan had called earlier saying he was working late. But deep inside she knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. She sat up, wrapped her arms around herself. The house felt colder than usual. And for the first time in her life, she was afraid. Afraid that the man she loved was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Victoria Monroe stood by the window of her penthouse, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. She had him now, not completely, not yet, but she had planted the seed. And soon Ethan Carter, the man who had vowed forever to another woman, would belong to her. Because temptation always wins. And love? Love is never as strong as people think, not when desire is in control. The night air was thick with unease. Aisha sat by the window, staring at the empty street below. She had been waiting for Ethan for hours. Her fingers trembled around the mug of tea, now cold. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, and something inside her whispered the truth she wasn't ready to face. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone. "Aisha, where are you?" No response. Minutes passed, then an hour, And then, without thinking, she grabbed her car keys and walked out into the night. She had to know. Aisha had never followed Ethan before. She had never doubted him. But tonight, doubt was a knife in her chest, twisting deeper with every second. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove through the city, the address she had seen on Ethan's planner. Victoria Monroe's penthouse. She wasn't even sure why she remembered it. But now, it was the only place that made sense. As she neared the luxury building, her breath grew shallow. She didn't even need to go inside, because standing in front of the glass-walled suite was Ethan, with her, Victoria, the woman who had slithered into their lives like a shadow. And at that moment, under the golden city lights, Ethan wasn't just with her. He was holding her. His hands rested on Victoria's waist, pulling her close. His lips brushed against hers. His eyes, ones that once belonged to Aisha, were now locked onto another woman's. Her world shattered in an instant. Aisha didn't remember how she got inside. Did she call security? Did she say she was Ethan's wife? She couldn't recall. Her vision was blurred with rage and heartbreak. By the time she reached the penthouse door, she barely felt the ground beneath her feet. The door was slightly open. Laughter spilled from inside. His laughter. That was the final crack before the dam broke. She pushed the door open, and there they were. Ethan, Victoria, locked in an embrace. Aisha's voice came out hoarse. Ethan. Silence. He turned, eyes widening in shock. Victoria smirked, unfazed. Aisha could barely breathe. Tell me I'm seeing things. Tell me this isn't real. Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. That silence was louder than any confession. It was admission. It was betrayal. Tears burned in Aisha's eyes. How long? Ethan swallowed hard. Aisha, how long? Her voice cracked, but her eyes remained locked onto his. His gaze dropped. A few months. Aisha let out a sharp breath, staggering back. A few months. Their love, their marriage, their promises, all for a few months. Victoria crossed her arms. You weren't supposed to find out this way. Aisha's blood boiled. You planned to tell me at all? Victoria smirked. Ethan looked away. That was all the answer Aisha needed. She should have screamed, she should have thrown something, but all she could do was stand there, frozen in the wreckage of what was once a love story. Ethan, she whispered, voice trembling. Tell me this isn't real. Tell me you love me. For a moment, she saw conflict in his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might fight for her. But then, Victoria placed a hand on his chest, and he didn't move it. That was the moment he chose, not with words, but with actions. Aisha's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Tears streamed down her face as she backed away. You were my forever, Ethan. A deep breath, a final whisper. Goodbye. She turned and walked away, and Ethan Carter, the man who once vowed to love her endlessly, let her go. Aisha drove through the empty streets, her chest hollow. She had spent years believing in him, believing in love. And now, love had left her for another woman. She wanted to scream, to tear off the wedding ring that suddenly felt like a weight around her finger, but she didn't. Instead, she drove home. And when she reached their bedroom, the bed they once shared, she finally allowed herself to break. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, for the man she lost, for the love that was stolen, for the woman she had once been. And that night, under the weight of betrayal, Dr. Aisha Malik swore that she would never be weak again. Ethan stood by the window of Victoria's penthouse, staring at the city below. His mind was loud with memories. Aisha's laughter, the way she used to touch his face when he was stressed, the way she whispered, "I love you," when she thought he was asleep. Now, all of it was gone. He had chosen Victoria. But why did his chest feel so empty? Why did it feel like he had just made the worst mistake of his life? Victoria wrapped her arms around him. She'll move on. Ethan exhaled. Would she? And more importantly, had he just lost the only woman who had ever truly loved him? The next morning, Aisha packed her bags. She couldn't stay in the same house filled with his scent, with his memories. She left behind her wedding ring on his nightstand. No note, no words, just silence. Because some betrayals don't need explanations. They speak for themselves, and as she walked out of the house that once held their dreams, Aisha vowed that Ethan Carter would regret this for the rest of his life. The envelope sat on the table like a death sentence. Aisha stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Her name was written neatly in Ethan's handwriting, Dr. Aisha Malik Carter. But soon, the Carter would be erased, swallowed into the void like their love. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Slowly, she pulled out the papers. There, in bold letters at the top, petition for divorce. The weight of the words pressed against her chest like a boulder. This was real. This was happening. Her husband, her love, the man who once swore forever, was officially letting her go. Ethan sat in his lawyer's office, hands clenched into fists. The papers were already signed. His lawyer assured him it was a clean break. No messy battles, no disputes. Aisha hadn't asked for anything, not money, not property. She had signed without hesitation. It should have been easy, but as he walked out of the office, something gnawed at his chest, something cold, something painful. He had chosen Victoria, yet why did it feel like he had just lost the most precious thing in his life? That night, Aisha let herself break. She sat on the cold bathroom floor, knees pulled to her chest. Her wedding ring was gone, but she still felt its weight on her finger. Ethan Carter was no longer her husband. Tears blurred her vision. The memories hit like crashing waves. The way he used to pull her close in his sleep. The way he kissed her forehead before leaving for work. The way he had once looked at her like she was the center of his world. Now he looked at another woman that way. He had chosen Victoria, and Aisha was left alone. But she refused to shatter completely. She wouldn't let heartbreak consume her. She had to survive, for herself, for the woman she would become. 2 months later, Ethan and Victoria's wedding was all over the news. A lavish affair. Billionaire Ethan Carter marries Victoria Monroe. The pictures were everywhere. Victoria in a stunning white gown. Ethan standing beside her, smiling. Aisha stared at the images, feeling her stomach twist. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't the diamonds or the expensive venue. It was Ethan's smile. He had once smiled like that at her, and now he was someone else's husband. She wanted to look away. She wanted to pretend it didn't matter, but deep inside something in her cracked. She had loved him with every piece of her soul, and he had erased her like she never existed. Friends called, colleagues whispered, the world pitied her. The wife who was left behind. But Aisha refused to be a tragic story. She held her head high. She went to work every day, saving lives. She buried herself in surgeries, research, anything to escape the pain, because if she stopped for even a moment, she would drown. On his honeymoon, Ethan should have been happy. Victoria was everything he had wanted, beautiful, young, glamorous, yet every time he looked at her, he thought of Aisha, her laughter, her fierce love, her quiet strength. At night he stared at the ceiling, haunted by memories. He had broken the one woman who had truly loved him. And the worst part, she hadn't begged, she hadn't fought, she had simply walked away. And that hurt more than anything. Months passed. The pain dulled, but it never fully disappeared. Aisha refused to be defined by her past. She worked harder. She became a renowned surgeon, traveling the world. Her name was no longer just Ethan Carter's ex-wife. It was *Dr. Aisha Malik, the woman who rose from the ashes. And with each passing day, she grew stronger. She would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. Ethan had broken her heart, but he had not destroyed her. And one day, he would realize what he had lost. The world expected Aisha to crumble, to disappear into the shadows as nothing more than Ethan Carter's discarded wife. But they didn't know her. She wasn't just a woman left behind. She was a force waiting to be unleashed. And now, she had nothing holding her back. Aisha buried herself in work. Longer shifts, more surgeries, more patients who needed her. The hospital became her escape. Inside the operating room, there was no heartbreak, no betrayal, only life and death. And she was determined to save as many lives as she could. Because if she was saving others, she didn't have to think about the one person she couldn't save, herself. Weeks turned into months. The pain of Ethan's betrayal dulled, replaced by a burning determination. She wasn't just working to escape. She was working to become something greater. She started medical research projects. She mentored young doctors. She traveled to remote villages, bringing medicine where none existed. And slowly, the world began to notice. Dr. Aisha Malik was no longer a heartbroken woman. She was a revolution. International conferences invited her as a speaker. Medical journals featured her breakthroughs. News channels praised her as a doctor who heals not just with medicine, but with heart. Aisha Malik became a name that carried power, a name that stood on its own, not attached to Ethan Carter, not attached to betrayal, only attached to excellence. Ethan saw the headlines. He saw the interviews. The woman he had left behind was now unstoppable. He had expected her to break. Instead, she had become legendary. And every success of hers felt like a knife in his gut, because while he had lost her, the world had gained a star. One evening, Aisha stood on a stage in London, delivering a powerful speech. The audience listened, captivated. She was confident, brilliant, radiant, and at the back of the crowd, Ethan was there, watching, regretting, realizing. She wasn't just the woman he had loved, she was the woman he had lost forever. Aisha had risen from the ashes, and this time she was flying higher than ever. The world expected Aisha to crumble, to disappear into the shadows as nothing more than Ethan Carter's discarded wife. But they didn't know her. She wasn't just a woman left behind. She was a force waiting to be unleashed. And now she had nothing holding her back. Aisha buried herself in work. Longer shifts, more surgeries, more patients who needed her. The hospital became her escape. Inside the operating room there was no heartbreak, no betrayal, only life and death. And she was determined to save as many lives as she could, because if she was saving others, she didn't have to think about the one person she couldn't save, herself. Weeks turned into months. The pain of Ethan's betrayal dulled, replaced by a burning determination. She wasn't just working to escape, she was working to become something greater. She started medical research projects, she mentored young doctors, she traveled to remote villages, bringing medicine where none existed. And slowly, the world began to notice. Dr. Aisha Malik was no longer a heartbroken woman. She was a revolution. International conferences invited her as a speaker. Medical journals featured her breakthroughs. News channels praised her as a doctor who heals not just with medicine, but with heart. Aisha Malik became a name that carried power, a name that stood on its own. Not attached to Ethan Carter, not attached to betrayal, only attached to excellence. Ethan saw the headlines, he saw the interviews. The woman he had left behind was now unstoppable. He had expected her to break. Instead, she had become legendary. And every success of hers felt like a knife in his gut, because while he had lost her, the world had gained a star. One evening, Aisha stood on a stage in London delivering a powerful speech. The audience listened, captivated. She was confident, brilliant, radiant, and at the back of the crowd, Ethan was there, watching, regretting, realizing she wasn't just the woman he had loved, she was the woman he had lost forever. Aisha had risen from the ashes, and this time she was flying higher than ever. Ethan Carter had everything, or so he thought. A stunning young wife, a luxurious mansion, endless wealth. Yet, when he woke up beside Victoria, he felt nothing but emptiness. Gone were the passionate mornings, the deep conversations, the quiet love he had once known. With Aisha, every moment had been real. With Victoria, it was just a performance, a shallow existence built on glittering lies. And slowly, the illusion began to crumble. At first, Victoria played the perfect wife, smiling at charity events, clinging to Ethan's arm at lavish parties, but behind closed doors, the act faded. She was restless, distant, cold. She spent Ethan's money faster than he could count, luxury bags, diamonds, private jets. Nothing was ever enough. And worst of all, she didn't love him. She loved what he could give her. One evening, Ethan returned home early from a business trip. He walked into their penthouse, expecting to find Victoria waiting for him. Instead, he found her phone unlocked on the table. A message popped up. His blood ran cold. "I can't wait to see you again, baby. He's too busy to notice anyway." Ethan's fingers clenched around the device. He scrolled through the messages. There it was. Proof. Victoria had found another rich man, just like he had once betrayed Aisha. Now, he was the one being betrayed. Ethan should have been furious, should have felt rage, but all he felt was pain. And one name echoed in his mind: Aisha. Aisha, who had loved him when he was nothing but a man. Aisha, who had given him her heart without expecting riches in return. Aisha, who had walked away with dignity when he had shattered her. He thought back to the way she had cried the night he confessed his affair, how she had whispered, "You were my world," and how he had thrown her away for this, for nothing. Ethan confronted Victoria that night. She didn't deny it. She laughed. "You didn't actually think this was love, did you?" she sneered. Ethan felt like a fool, like a man stripped of everything, and for the first time in his life, he understood what real loss felt like. He had given up the one person who truly loved him, and now he had nothing. Desperation clawed at him. He had to find her. He needed to see her, to beg, to fix what he had broken. But Aisha wasn't in the same place he had left her. She wasn't waiting for him. She was thriving, saving lives, changing the world, living without him. And Ethan realized he might have lost her forever. Ethan Carter had once stood at the top of the world. Now he stood outside her door, stripped of pride, stripped of ego, stripped of everything, except regret. For months he had followed Aisha's success from afar, every headline, every interview, every moment she shined, without him. And now, with nothing left to lose, he had come to beg, to plead, to fix what he had destroyed, if she would let him. Aisha opened the door, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't seen Ethan in years, but time had changed him. The confident, untouchable billionaire was gone. Before her stood a broken man, dark circles beneath his eyes, a weight on his shoulders, his once proud posture hunched with regret. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, and yet she never expected it to feel like this. Ethan's voice was hoarse. "I was a fool, Aisha." She closed her eyes. The sound of his voice was a storm, pulling her back in time. Back to late-night whispers. Back to mornings in his arms. back to the moment he had betrayed her. She forced herself to stay strong. "You're 5 years too late, Ethan." Pain flashed in his eyes, but he nodded. "I know, but I need you to hear me." She let him in, only because she wanted to see his regret, to hear his words, to remind herself why she had walked away. Ethan stood in her living room, out of place in the world she had built, without him. "I thought I had everything," he said. "But I had nothing, Aisha. You were my everything." She folded her arms. "And yet, you threw me away for a woman who never loved you." He flinched. "I was blind. I was selfish, and I've suffered for it every day since." His voice cracked. "I wake up every morning wishing I could take it all back." Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You think an apology is enough?" she whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness," Ethan said. "I don't even deserve it." His eyes locked onto hers, desperate. "But if there's even the smallest piece of you that still feels what we had," he stepped closer, "give me a chance. Let me prove I can be the man you deserve." Aisha's heart ached, because no matter how much she had tried to bury it, she still loved him. But love wasn't trust, love wasn't forgetting, and love wasn't enough. A long silence stretched between them. Then Aisha spoke, her voice firm. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Ethan." His eyes filled with pain, but he nodded. "I'll wait," he whispered. She turned away, because if she looked at him any longer, she wasn't sure she'd be strong enough to say no. Ethan Carter had lost almost everything, but he hadn't lost all of it. Not yet. He still had his business, his last fortress, until Victoria destroyed that too. At first, he didn't question how she moved on so quickly. She had left him without hesitation, running straight into the arms of an even richer man, a man named Roman Vasilev. Ethan had heard the name before, a ruthless billionaire, a king in the world of illegal dealings. And Victoria? She had sold her loyalty to him the moment Ethan had crumbled. It started with whispers, then sudden stock drops, then board members withdrawing their support. Ethan's company, his empire, was being torn apart, piece by piece. And when he traced the root of it all, it led straight to Victoria and Roman. They had orchestrated everything, planted spies in his company, manipulated the markets, turned his allies into enemies. And now Ethan Carter was drowning. Ethan stormed into Victoria's penthouse. She lounged on a velvet sofa, sipping champagne, her fingers adorned with new diamonds. Diamonds he hadn't bought. She looked at him with mocking amusement. "You always were predictable, Ethan." His hands clenched into fists. "How could you do this?" His voice was low, trembling with fury. Victoria laughed. "Do you really need me to answer that?" She leaned forward, her smile venomous. "You were just a stepping stone, a beautiful, powerful stepping stone, but nothing more." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had thrown away the woman who loved him for this. And now he had nothing left. The lawsuits hit first, the fines, the investigations, the public disgrace. Headlines flashed across every screen. Ethan Carter's empire in ruins. Was it all built on lies? His board members abandoned him, investors pulled out, and within months the mighty Ethan Carter was financially ruined. No wealth, no power, no Victoria, and worst of all, no Aisha. Ethan sat in his empty penthouse staring at the city skyline, the same skyline he had once ruled. Now it was just a reminder of what he had lost. His heart ached with one name, one face. Aisha. The woman who had loved him, without conditions. The woman he had betrayed. And now she was the only thing in the world that mattered. But had he lost her forever? Aisha Malik stood in her private hospital office reviewing a patient file when she heard a knock. A familiar knock. Her heart stilled. She already knew who it was before she looked up. Ethan Carter stood at the door. But he wasn't the Ethan she once knew. Gone was the powerful billionaire, the man who had once stood untouchable. Now he looked hollow. His suit, though tailored, hung on his frame as if he had lost weight. His once confident blue eyes were now filled with pain and longing. But the worst part, it still hurt to see him, even after all this time. "I shouldn't have come," Ethan said softly. His voice was rough, as if he hadn't slept in days, but he didn't leave. He stepped inside, his movements slow, uncertain, so unlike him. Aisha straightened. "I don't have time for this." She turned back to her desk, willing her heart to be stronger than her emotions, but then he whispered, "I have nothing left, Aisha." And against her better judgment, she looked at him again. "I lost everything," Ethan admitted, stepping closer. "My business, my reputation. Victoria betrayed me." He let out a bitter laugh. "Guess I got what I deserved." Aisha clenched her fists. "Yes, you did." The words were sharp, but her voice trembled. Ethan's gaze darkened with regret. "But losing you, Aisha, that was the real punishment." A deep ache spread through her chest. She wanted to hate him. She should hate him. But love didn't just vanish. It lingered like an old wound, refusing to heal. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Ethan continued, his voice raw. "I know I shattered your trust. But Aisha, I never stopped loving you." Aisha swallowed hard. "Love isn't enough, Ethan." He flinched but nodded. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for a chance to earn back your trust." Silence hung between them. Aisha's mind screamed to walk away, but her heart was at war. Could she trust him again? Could she take back the man who had once shattered her? For years, she had rebuilt herself, stronger, wiser, independent. She didn't need him. But in that moment, as she looked into his broken eyes, she realized something. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, and maybe, just maybe, some love stories deserved a second chance. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. "If you ever betray me again, Ethan, there won't be another chance." Ethan's eyes filled with hope. He nodded, his voice shaking. "I swear, Aisha, this time I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." And for the first time in years, Aisha let him hold her again. Love wasn't perfect. Trust had to be rebuilt. But as Ethan and Aisha stood together, they knew one thing. This time, their love wasn't about fairy tales. It was about redemption. And no matter what came next, they would face it together.